No Child Left Behind Act. The education system is a reflection of society and culture. Students reflect the diversity of the United States, and schools should be prepared to combat the inevitable cultural biases and inequalities that will be present in the classroom. Teachers can be sources of gender and racial biases. Students with disabilities often face stigma, a lack of resources, and isolation from their peers. Students of a lower socioeconomic status often face a harsher school environment with less funding and opportunities. Teachers and administrators can also face biases in regard to race, sexuality, and gender. These issues can be compounded when intersectionality is present, which is when students and adults face multiple sources of inequality. Educators must work to combat both internal and external sources of inequality by supporting and uplifting students and coworkers who face these issues. Pluralistic democracy and education. Education is absolutely essential to a pluralistic democracy. According to Quantz, liberal education should be understood as the education needed by a free citizen who must accept and carry out his or her responsibilities in the governing of the city-state. If people are educated with broad and inclusive ideas, they will ensure that the government will be influenced by broad and inclusive ideas. This will help to ensure that the government is not controlled by a select few interest groups with little diversity. What is the social foundations of education? Foundations of education include philosophy, theory, and historical perspectives. Within schools, it is important to give everyone equal access to the same opportunities. A goal for students and professors should be to always focus on ways to better the schooling system in years to come. The No Child Left Behind Act. The major focus of No Child Left Behind is to close student achievement gaps by providing all children with a fair, equal, and significant opportunity to obtain a high-quality education. The U.S. Department of Education emphasizes 4 pillars within the bill. Accountability, to ensure those students who are disadvantaged achieve academic proficiency. Flexibility, this allows school districts flexibility in how they use federal education funds to improve student achievement. Research-based education emphasizes educational programs and practices that have been proven effective through scientific research. Parent options increases the choices available to the parents of students attending Title I schools. At the core of No Child Left Behind is the ultimate goal of closing the academic achievement gap that exists between students living in poverty, students of color, and other students.
Now we'll talk about the history of race and relation to the critical race theory. Many people never question the fact that race is real, when indeed it is not. In 1930, the U.S. Census changed Mexican ancestry from white to non-white to limit immigration. In 2000, the government decided you could be more than one race. Critical race theorists examine how we believe in the reality of race. Now we have the critical race theory. It's defined in the dictionary as the view that the law and legal institutions are inherently racist, and that race itself, instead of being biologically grounded and natural, is a socially constructed concept that is used by white people to further their economic and political interests at the expense of people of color. It also focuses on the effects of race and racism while addressing and critiquing the hegemonic system of white supremacy. The theory derived in the 1970s to address racism and developed over time with Derek Bell, Alan Friedman, and more. Derek Bell was the father of the critical race theory. He was the first black tenured professor at Harvard in 1971. Now we see the tenets of the critical race theory. First, we have the normalcy of racism. Many people normalize society and believe that it is picture perfect with no faults. However, this is far from the truth. Critical race theorists, however, believe society is unfair and imperfect, and that racism is embedded into everyday life. Number 2 is interest convergence. Derek Bell argued that blacks were only interested in gaining racial equality when it is intersected with the white race, which, for example, is the Brown versus Board of Education case, which was a stride toward racial equality. And third, we have our whiteness as property, which is symbolic in the fact that whites were given the privilege to own property and even own black people as slaves back in the day. Coming in number 4 is the critique of liberalism. Liberalism is everyone has access to freedom and equality, which equals peace. Race does not matter to this perspective. And number 5, the counter-narratives or counter-storytelling, which aims to uncover the truths of the generalizations that support stereotypes. Frederick Douglass's narrative is a great example of this, as he uses graphic real-life experiences in his book and does not cover up anything except for how he and many of the other slaves escaped from slavery. Now we'll talk about the No Child Left Behind Act and the critical race theory. The critical race theory approach to education involves the commitment of institutions to recognize the various strengths that students and communities of color have to offer so we move towards social and racial justice. This is according to Yasso. This is especially important as the No Child Left Behind Act aims to give all children an equal opportunity to obtain a high-quality education. And we have a big issue in our society revolving around the theory and the act. There is a limited amount of information on how the critical race theory influences public education and public schools with this act. This is why we must change this.
Next, we have the connection to historical nature of schools and the influence on present-day inequalities. Tatum said, American schools were never designed to educate everyone. Biased intelligence tests and perceptions of intelligence help to perpetuate the idea that people of color are less intelligent than whites. Teachers today will likely be biased against Black and Latino students because of these lasting biases and stereotypes. Racial segregation in schools still exists today. Richard Rothstein once said, "Education policy is constrained by housing policy. It is not possible to desegregate schools without desegregating both low-income and affluent neighborhoods." Next, we have some recommendations and implications. For the first recommendation, it's important to make sure to intermix students of different races, socioeconomic status, and so on in a classroom setting. The hopes in doing this are that if students are mixed together in their classes at young ages, then they will learn to be comfortable around each other, no matter what color their skin is, where they live, or how much money they have. The second recommendation we came up with is trying to have a course that would focus on important issues like the critical race theory, bullying, school safety, and any other important issues that are seen in schools. If this course is implemented into a school curriculum, preferably when students are young, the hope would be to limit the biases students have and open up their eyes to these key issues. Our next recommendation is having teachers implement current events into their classrooms. The following are some examples of how they could do this. First, teachers could set up a bulletin board with recent events on it that they update every week or so. Second, teachers could use the first few minutes of class to discuss recent events happening in the world. And the final example we would give is to have a box that students can anonymously write questions in, and the teachers can draw out to answer. Another recommendation is having speakers come to school and discuss a controversial topic. These speakers could be optional for students and faculty, or they could be required for the whole school to be present. Speakers may offer ideas and interpretations that many students have yet to think about, which could be very beneficial to them. Next, schools could have a day dedicated to important issues within the education system. There could be speakers incorporated into this day, students who speak, lectures, helpful videos, breakout groups, workshops, and so on. An implication regarding the application process for schools could be removing demographic questions that are specifically related to race or gender. The key here is to still promote scholarships for students of different demographics, but not having race and gender affect someone's chances of getting into a school. The last recommendation we will give is to incorporate student presentations on controversial topics to a classroom setting. At the beginning of the year, students can choose to work alone or with others on a topic that interests them that they will eventually present to the class. The goal is to have students teach each other about topics that they think need to be focused on. In conclusion, schools have a long and fraught history with racial injustice. Modern legislation, including No Child Left Behind, does not do enough to combat the inequality present in the education system. James Baldwin once said, "It is your responsibility to change society if you think of yourself as an educated person." White educators especially must use their privilege to hold themselves accountable for the internal racial biases, work to uplift and support their students of color, and ensure that all students are educated about race issues and social justice. Finally, being educated is essential for creating social change and combating social inequalities, both in the education system and in a wider society.